outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I am Jamie Clark, and this is the Saturday show. And we are live. We are broadcasting live on social media, on various platforms right now. But if you're listening to this recording, then welcome as well. We've got a great guest today, who is Martin Ferguson from Ireland, Northern Ireland, who's going to be speaking about special educational needs and disabilities, so SEND students and writing. So I'm really excited for this. I've been doing a lot of work with Martin recently in the last few months and over the course of the year with some one-pages and posters and stuff like that. And Martin's a really talented educator, so I can't wait to speak to him today. Just want to let you know about the Saturday show live, though, just before we get into things. Just want to remind you that the show is on every other Saturday, and that's at 1 p.m. till 2 p.m, and that is UK time. So wherever you are in the world, please make sure you're aware of the time difference, and please tune in whenever you can, because we have a good selection of guests on this show, and I'm pretty proud of what we've managed to achieve so far in terms of the playlist, which I've put together. We've got some great guests in the past, such as Peter Sherwin. We've had talks about homework that works with Joe Castellino, Dr. Zach Groeschel as well on direct instruction. So lots of probably familiar faces if you do follow these people on social media, but also some really, really interesting topics around teaching and learning. And you can find those topics on the playlist, which is on YouTube. So I'm going to share that link as well, probably with you guys after the show on X and also on LinkedIn as well. If you do follow me on there, you can check out the previous shows, so please do. Before we get into the chat today, I do really want to talk about the sponsors too, because we have some really unique sponsors on the show on Teachers Talk Radio, and one obviously being the almighty John Catt Educational. If you don't know about John Catt, then they are pretty much the best publishers, I think, of professional development books in the world. Personally, I've got tons of them, and they are great for supporting good practice for teaching and learning and for leveling up your own professional development. So if you're interested, then check out their website, which is johncattbookshop.com, and explore the full range of titles. Sneak peek of the guest's book today, Martin Ferguson's book. This is See One, Do One, Teach One, 12 Lessons to Support GCSE English. This is a John Catt publication, and you can get 20% off using that code on their website, which is JCTTR2425, if you want to check that out. We also have another sponsor on Teachers Talk Radio, which is Reading Solutions UK. If you don't know Reading Solutions UK they are the home of online reading development. They have an online program called Dreambox Reading Plus, which I've had a bit of a browser on the website. It looks really interesting, and it's a tool where you can create stronger readers in your school community from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, and that's using their Reading Plus evidence-based adaptive technology, which we might even dig into a bit today, actually, with Martin. So Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skill gaps and then places them on a personalized pathway, and it's built to accelerate their strengths and improve their areas for development in reading. So check that out, and if you go onto their website, you can actually find a 4-week free pilot. So you can go on there if you search for Reading Solutions UK and request the free pilot, and it's probably worth doing for your school if you want to check that out. Okay, so let's get into the show today. As I said, we're going to be talking about special educational needs and disabilities, so SEND students and writing in particular, and bits of literacy as well with Martin. Just a bit of context, I'm sure you're aware though, but a significant challenge in schools today is supporting SEND students in their writing. Martin Ferguson has brought this to attention and the new unique difficulties, I guess, that these students face in mastering writing skills in the classroom. We know that, students in these with these disabilities and special needs often have demands on working memory, which overburden them and overwhelm them and leads to frustration and disengagement. So Martin's going to talk through some strategies as well. And I'm sure that you can imagine that Martin's done a lot of work in this area. He's got a lot of excellent strategy in his book for GCSE English students, but also translate to SEND students as well. So Martin, just a bit about him. As an experienced English teacher, he's actually currently working for Time Out for Positive Steps in Belfast at the minute. He's got a rich background that includes leadership in an all-girls school and a co-ed school as well. Martin's made significant contributions to literacy in education and published this fantastic book as well, which I encourage you to check out. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce Martin. I don't want to steal his thunder too much. I wanted to kind of explain a bit of this himself as well. So I want to welcome him to the stage.
Hello.
Hi, Martin.
Hi, Jamie. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. I don't know if I did you justice there. I kind of stumbled a little bit. I'm
No.
still recovering from a bit of a chest infection, so forgive me.
Right.
But I guess the first thing you can do better than is probably introduce yourself and your journey in education, Martin.
Yeah, of course. So I started out, I went to Queen's University in Belfast, and I did my PGC there, and my degree was English and Politics. My first job, I started in a all ability school, which was co-ed, and it was basically a chance to teach kids with a broad range of challenges and also abilities. And so I kind of got a big view of the challenges in the classroom for different types of pupils quite early on in my career. In our system, we have a grammar system and we have a secondary system. And the funny thing is, when you come through a grammar school yourself, you don't encounter very many pupils in your own class or beyond with the difficulties and barriers. So when you go into schools with all ability kids and you see the different ranges of ability, it can be quite overwhelming. So it was kind of having to readjust and recalibrate my teaching from what I had experienced as a pupil and what I had learned at university, and trying to find that blend, and also then with SEN, send children in the class. Just the big word I would use is adaptability, and that kind of is a work in progress even today. So that's where I'm coming from. I then was head of English in an all-girls school in Belfast for 6 years, and a highly successful team and a very good school. And we built a very, very strong English department, and we focused on our CD boundary and trying to work with pupils with reading barriers. We provided paired reading schemes, one-to-one tuition outside of class, and reducing some of that workload and giving them more focused tasks to build their reading and writing skills. So kind of that template was born out of my experience, and then the expertise we had in the school as well. And also, one thing that makes a huge difference is availability of space, and we were lucky to have that. And so my move then into Time Out for Positive Steps in Belfast in TOPS, it's an EA service, which is in Belfast. It's the Education Authority service, and it's for pupils who have a CAMS referral or have mental health issues and struggle in mainstream, and they come to us for small group tutoring, which is great. And to me personally, it kind of felt like a chance to make up for some of the times where I couldn't get to those children in my class, because there were 30 in every class. And it's kind of, I always kind of thought I would like to go back to that small group setting again and try and make headway and influence there as well. And so that model works. It's small groups, lots of complex needs in terms of mental health, but equally a range of ability too, which is a perfect blend for me to kind of work with, you know. So that's how I arrived where I am today.
Yeah, great. And your work in the book that you brought out a couple of years ago, this See One, Do One, Teach One, it does touch on some of the topics, doesn't it, that you introduce regularly into your classroom, you know, today, in terms of scaffolding and structuring, you know, learning for students. Do you want to tell us a bit about your book first, and then how it's kind of led into what you do nowadays?
Well, so the book, the title was, my wife is a surgical doctor trainee. She had been talking about the medical approach to things as See One, Do One, Teach One. And she kind of, I talked to her about what we were doing during COVID. We had to break things down, actually, so that we were kind of more focused in COVID because we had more time, and that always makes a difference. And I think it was born out of that idea of thinking about the class at home on their own. How can I make this lesson accessible? And that kind of recalibrated my own teaching. So I took that idea and I thought about the curriculum and the topics. I sat down and I thought, right, what were the top 10 to 12 topics or areas that they're going to encounter and that I found needed the most work and repetition. And so I started to sort of put them into a hierarchy, and then those lessons were born out of that. So the idea behind it was through Rosenshine's principles of instruction, and I tried to build in that sort of recall, recap.
Yeah.
The C1, they get a model example, and then they do it themselves, and then the teach one can be either the teacher uses that if you're a trainee teacher, or the class can take that script and have it
Yeah.
kind of distilled down, and you can give that out as peer assessment. So it was
Yeah.
just trying to think about a lesson in thirds
Yeah.
in some ways, because we usually have lessons of 45 minutes or to an hour. So to me, it was 20-minute blocks. So even that was a conscious thing of setting the book out in that way.
Yeah.
So persuasive writing was one, which was a key, um, because it's very challenging for them to find the blend between their own sense of style and purpose and using techniques
Yeah.
for effect, and also pulling in what their thoughts were. And that fusion can often be a difficult place to be for teenagers when they're writing. So
Yeah.
scaffolding was a big part of it.
Yeah,
It's just trying to
and
bring that.
that's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because obviously this ties in a lot with what we're going to mention today. Because I know that the first topic we're going to mention is the cognitive demands of writing. So I know
Mhm,
you've done a lot of research in terms of working
mhm,
memory and breaking things down and scaffolding. And I love the fact that you've put this in place in a normal kind of conventional school setting,
mhm.
because we worked on a couple of posters, didn't we? Or 3 posters. These
Yes.
ones here from
Yeah.
your book this year, was it? I can't remember.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
this
it.
year,
Yeah,
early
yeah.
this year. On those topics you mentioned. And the reason why I want to bring this up, because it clearly shows those Rosenshine's principles, which I do think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, do apply to students with special educational needs and disabilities quite
Mhm.
well in the classroom to
Yeah.
support their progress. So let's dig into that, and we'll just quickly talk about, I guess, the first key area from what we're going to go into today, Martin, which is the cognitive demands of writing and working memory, and the impact
Mhm,
of writing on
mhm.
working memory for students with special educational needs and disabilities, because obviously it is a cognitively demanding process for students with SEND. Do you want to explain how it does burden working memory?
Well, it's kind of a fusion of those three areas that we talked about: transcription, composition,
Yeah.
and executive function. And the demands on working memory for students, for SEN students, it's holding and manipulating information, and a
Yeah.
lot of writing is, through transcription, composition, and executive function of actually holding the pen and fine motor skills. Blending all of those things together is cognitively demanding
Yeah.
for the most neurotypical pupils, but
Yeah.
for SEN pupils, this juggling of multiple tasks become and generating ideas and organization, spelling, grammar, handwriting, it can overwhelm the working memory, and you get this kind of, in my experience, it creates difficulties in terms of coherence and fluency. But
Yeah.
in the same sort of realm of that, you kind of get a behavioral aspect to it at times, where
Yeah.
children will kind of retire hurt and they don't want to
Yeah.
engage with it, and that's understandable, because from a pastoral perspective, which I think often in research we kind of don't think about the pastoral element of things, and writing is English is a pastoral subject in many ways. um so from the pastoral end of that, it's their experience in the classroom, going to 5 lessons throughout the course of the day, with that demand on working memory, and
Yeah.
not being able to sufficiently engage with the task or the curriculum. Um, it does call into question how we set our classrooms up, how we provide
Yeah.
for those pupils. And so those demands on writing, on transcription, for example, the physical act of writing, is difficult for the reasons we're going to talk about later, about dyspraxia and dysgraphia.
Yeah.
If you add those in, the composition of generating ideas, and creating a coherent text, that's whilst the planning process is happening, and they're trying to pull in higher order processes, such as in the executive function end of it, higher order processes such as planning, revising, and
Mm.
also self regulation. So
Mm.
I teach a couple of children with ADD, ADHD, and to watch that struggle is really difficult. And you can I can quickly intervene. Whereas when I was in a larger class setting of 30,
Yeah.
it's very difficult, and it usually manifests itself as a rejection of the task, or
I'll
you know,
just chip in there, Martin. I
yeah,
actually completely agree with you, and I'll give you a
mm,
bit of a personal insight to everyone as well. That my son is actually ASD, so he's level
oh, okay,
2 ASD.
hmm
Everything he's saying, I'm just picturing in his
hmm
classroom right now, because he does get frustrated with writing. You know, he's only
hmm
5, but he does. They do write on mini whiteboards and whatnot in class,
yeah,
and he's kind of like he struggles because he gets frustrated. You know, with fine motor skills, there is a lot to think about in terms of the formation of the letters,
hmm
and you know, sequencing things together. So I totally understand what you're saying there in terms of students becoming overburdened and overwhelmed by it, and
hmm
often get frustrated by it as well.
Yeah, and it's like the scaffolding effect, and thinking of scaffolding. Um, but I think what we have to remember as well is a lot, including myself, I've been in teacher training, and you're like, but we do that anyway. But it's not to that extent. It's to an extent of intentionality. It's
Mm,
sitting down and thinking about the specific pupil and how they react, and how they work through the lesson, and
yeah,
having them in your head is more intentional than, well, they've ASD and I'll just apply this strategy.
yeah,
You will
yeah,
get nuance in there, and with
yeah,
smaller settings, you can develop that. Um, I'll give you one example. A pupil that I teach, excellent reading skills, very good at picking up vocabulary. But when it comes to structure, and he has ADHD, when it comes to actually, we'll do all the build up, and then when it comes to the writing, I know that he's 10 minutes max for him.
yeah,
But I'll get like eight lines out of him. Um, but for him, that's like a big win.
yeah,
And it's trying to build that, getting rid of that tentative feeling of just even putting the pen to paper. And the other thing we have to add in there is the making of mistakes and editing. So you have to try and convince them that it's okay. That I'm kind of working with a couple of children with ASD who are very particular in terms of like the direction of travel.
yeah,
It's really interesting, because they catch some things that I miss, which is great. But I keep saying to them, it's progress over perfection. That's,
yeah,
and it's trying to shape that progression for them, but you have to map it out. So
yeah,
things like that, little nuances across the classes, and the children specifically. So like your son, it's not a one size fits all, but it certainly is something that requires you to sit down and think about that pupil personally.
yeah,
Or if you can group them with similar characteristics, but there should be some sort of calibration towards them. And that's kind of where I'm at the minute with this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. I just want to remind
Mhm.
people as well, this is a live broadcast, live show.
Mhm.
So if you do want to ask Martin any questions, feel free to drop that into the chat, and we'll bring them up on screen and try and answer them if we can do.
Mhm.
So just keep that in mind. But the other thing was, Martin, I wanted to move on to the work we did recently in terms of the
Mhm.
poster,
Mhm.
which seemed to have gone down quite well on X. You know, people seem to
Yeah.
be quite keen to download it and to
Mhm.
share it. And this is what Martin and I created together.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it kind of summarizes what we're going to be talking about today. But the reason why I brought it up on screen as well is because I wanted you to unpack a little bit the simple view of writing, the diagram, the triangle, because you did mention, executive function and transcription and composition, but some people might not know what they are. Do you want to quickly
Mhm.
outline what they are and why it's
So
important for us to understand?
sure, yeah. So part of so the division into those three subgroups helps you understand all of the things that a pupil is working with at any one time. And
Mm,
I felt that teachers, including myself, um, need an insight to this to really understand the huge task that writing can be. It's not to lower standards. It's certainly not to reduce the accessibility to the curriculum. It's to kind of have an awareness. That's all it is, and to create a conversation like today. So the idea of the transcription process, we'll start with that, is based on the process of spelling, typing, and handwriting, and it
mm,
involves the physical act of writing. So it's holding the pen a certain way, it's the fine motor skills, it's the use of spelling and sounds as well, and how they transcribe those to the page.
Mm.
And a major one would be that I would see often is random capitals used in different parts of writing. The letters that elongate down into the next line aren't long enough. You'll see like some examples of that that you have to go back and edit with some pupils, and they're quite common.
Yeah.
Everybody has a distinct handwriting style, but it's trying to get that normative or agreeable style of handwriting, because some pupils are never, they just like the way they write, and that's fine. But transcription is the physical act of writing.
Yeah.
And then composition is the idea of creating a coherent text and sitting down and generating and organizing ideas. So what we would have done in school are spider diagrams, where
Yeah.
we put our ideas down, and then what I have got into the habit of doing now is numbering them, which one's the most important.
Oh yeah.
Something
Rank
like
order.
that is really, really effective, and it's basically rank order. Yeah, and again, you can link it with your maths, your numeracy. You have to, what's the most important, what's most likely, what's least likely. So
Yeah.
there's lots of ways you can help support that. So it's the process of generating ideas and organizing them to create coherent text. And then the executive function element, that's kind of dealing with the planning and motivation aspect. It's
Yeah.
the higher order processes of planning and writing and self-regulation. So it's maybe choosing specific words. Why have I chosen that word and it left this one out? What can I add in here? Potentially, adding in a technique, a writing technique, and it's where does that best fit? And for a lot
Yeah.
of pupils, that can be quite a natural thing to do. Persuasive writing, I'll talk about that later, is quite a nice in for that.
Yeah.
So it's just dealing with the higher order processes of writing, and regulating your writing in terms of, you say to them, don't go off on a tangent. Like it's kind of knowing when they made their point, and I've made
Yeah.
mine. Hopefully, I'm not going off on a tangent. So.
Well, the poster then kind of summarizes, that in the diagram beautifully. I really like it. It's from who's it from again? It's from
So Michael Morpurgo.
yeah.
We used to teach Kensuke's Kingdom, and every year that we kind of read the book, this particular quote came up, and there were so many of the pupils said that sounds like me, and it was really weird because it happened every year.
Have you
And
got the quote there?
yeah, it's so I'll just break it down. So
Yeah.
he's talking about writing his diary in chapter 2, and he says there, I spoke from my head, down my arm, through my fingers, and onto the page. But he prefaces that with, I was never that good at writing in school, and I couldn't get. And so when we used to look at that quotation then and think about our writing and what are the difficulties, so that was where the idea came, to bring that to yourself, was how can I help teachers understand from the head down the arm to the fingers and onto the page. So that's really where the idea came from,
Right.
in terms of the page.
Yeah, brilliant.
Mhm.
And Martin's actually giving away his slides, I believe, from Research Ed, which you presented these at this a few weeks ago. Was it last week? I think you presented, didn't
Yeah,
you, these
last
ideas?
Saturday. Yeah.
So Martin's happy to share those slides on everything we're
Yep.
going to be talking about today, and also you can get this poster on the link there, so on my website. So let's move on a little bit, Martin. We're going to talk about specific learning differences in terms of the ones that we summarized on the poster. You're the expert. I was just kind of taking your lead on it, but
Sure.
the three main areas were dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyslexia, sorry, 4 main areas, and ASD as well.
Yeah.
Let's start with dysgraphia then. So what is dysgraphia, and how can it impact a student's ability to write legibly and fluently?
So dysgraphia is, it's got the word graph in it, to write. So it's this idea of it affects the writing ability, and particularly the legibility and fluency. So lots of children who have dysgraphia, and some that I work with, can take quite a long time to complete the writing of a sentence. They need like extended time. They're very sort of a checklist approach is what I would use with writing with kids with the dysgraphia. So it's this process that involves holding the pen and the physical act of writing. So that's why I have that in there, because it links to transcription. It's one element
Yeah,
of
of course.
transcription.
Yeah.
And so the difficulty is letter formation, selection of letters, capital or uppercase, lowercase, and actually having to spend time with two pupils discussing
Mm.
upper and lowercase letters.
Mm.
Because what has happened is some of these children have been out of school for a while, and so they develop these habits of writing, and they've
Mm.
become, this idea. David Dido talks about automaticity, and
Mm.
it's part of their automaticity. And I've actually explained that to them. We're going to have to untrain parts of your brain,
Yeah.
and then put it back into the brain gym again, and try and do some upper lowercase stuff.
Yeah.
And we found that with the whiteboards, they are more likely to take part in that in the beginning. Because when we started out, they were comparing, so they were looking at each other's to see
Yeah.
where they're. So it was interesting that way, and they were showing each other how to do it. So we can trace on the whiteboards. I don't know if this is a thing, but because whiteboards, you can wipe it away.
Yeah.
The sort of anxiety of writing and making mistakes is becomes commonplace because they
It's
can
low
just wipe it
stakes,
away.
isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
and it's
like in any classroom, like if you give students the chance to, practice something on a mini whiteboard, it can be easily erased. It's kind of low stakes. It's not going to be recorded.
yeah.
And you can hold it up if you want to, or you can just, I guess, rub it out if you want to. So I understand that.
So that does work. One important thing about dysgraphia, and I've been reading up on these different parts for a
Mm.
long time now. A lot of the features can be varied across different children. It's never one size fits all, which is why I
Mm.
said at the start, for me, it's getting to know the pupil personally.
Yeah.
That's the key. And so it's not intelligence related. It links to pencil grip, and you may see characteristics like run-on sentences, odd spacing in the writing, and fine motor skills might be an issue. So really good example in TOPS and we're the centre where we are. We've introduced crocheting, knitting.
Mm.
So we come in the morning. We thought they wouldn't take to it at all. You come in the
They love it.
morning, and there's boys, girls sitting there just crocheting, and
All
they're
right.
just doing it. It's I just it's every day I see it, I'm like, this is incredible. So I'm like, if you can get me a wee beanie hat for Christmas or something, that would
Yeah.
be great. Keep the heat in. But that is the working on the motor skills.
Yeah.
And we have a pupil with dysgraphia, and that's what he does. He's so it's interesting to watch that, and then we kind of try and use that as a support and working on those muscles for him as well,
Yeah.
on his hands with his, and dyspraxia as well is linked to that slightly. So we've got those two things kind of working in the same at the same time. So that's just one approach you can use, like muscle strengthening techniques and things,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I'm reading into at the minute. But there is a link to low self-esteem there as well,
Okay.
because the writing can sometimes, from the chronological age, the writing doesn't look like the pupil at
Yeah.
the age of 15, and they kind of feel that when they have to share their writing and stuff.
Kind of feel a bit embarrassed, would you say?
Yeah. I found that, like, they want to work separately, and
Yeah.
that's fine. And um, when we're sort of reading each other's work, or I'm going around, they don't want the others to see. But
Yeah.
what I have noticed is over time that kind of dissipates when we've built up that sort of safe environment. So um, writing can be slow and laboured. It could be links to low self-esteem, run-on sentences, a wee bit of odd spacing are some of the characteristics that you might see from
Yeah.
pupils with dysgraphia.
Martin, just pausing there for a second.
Mhm.
We have a question, I believe, from
Mhm.
Facebook.
Mhm.
Whiteboard pens slide across whiteboards a lot easier than pencils on paper too. So
Yeah,
you agree with that?
like that's the other thing with what I noticed was the pressure of a pupil holding a pen or a pencil, and that pressure on the page and in the
Yeah.
indent of the finger. And it sounds so arbitrary, but like it does make a difference. It's if it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable to write, like we've bought pencil grips and things
Yeah.
to try and soften that. But particularly like the HB pencils that are shaped, sort of an octagon, or hexagon, they kind of they don't like writing with those, so we put the protectors in to use those. And the whiteboard pens they move quite easily. Yeah, so you've got that. The pressure of the writing as well is another element of that too.
Well, thanks to the person who sent that in. That's quite an interesting point. Yeah. Let's quickly flip over to dyspraxia. So, Martin, what is dyspraxia, and what strategies can we use, to kind of support students who have that condition?
So dyspraxia can sort of coexist as well with like other conditions that I've seen with some of my pupils. One particular pupil, and it affects the motor skills and coordination, and that then affects the writing process. So that's where with that pupil we use the ergonomic writing tool grip, so that they are more likely to engage with that. They kind of need more structured routines as well, in terms of I have to kind of give him a heads up if we're doing some heavy writing that day, or if we're doing bits and pieces, just to let him know beforehand. And a big part of that is breaking things into smaller steps for dyspraxic pupils. So it can coexist and it with other conditions, and it's more to do with the idea of coordination and body coordination. And then there are some pupils with, if you add in hypermobility to that, again, writing can be difficult to kind of, it's not legible, it's not neat, and there can be delayed hand dominance, meaning that it might take longer for them to establish a dominant hand for writing as well in some research. So there's quite a lot going on there in terms of dyspraxia, but it's a motor condition that can affect, not just the writing process, but body movement.
I see. Okay. And what kind of strategies can we implement then in terms of, to support these students?
Well, so for us, like energy is a huge thing, and maintaining that pace and energy in a lesson is difficult.
Right.
So we kind of use extended time, shorter tasks. We use use of technology. So we would use things like text speak, where you can in Microsoft Teams you can talk into the microphone, it'll dictate for you, and then you can print that out, and then you can even just do some corrections, which is less labor intensive then. So you can get them to say what they want to write and then restructure it, which is quite a healthy exercise too.
That's very useful.
Because they get to share their thoughts without the burden, like I said at the start, of working memory, executive function, and everything else. So assistive technologies are great in a small setting. I think in mainstream, it's very, very hard to execute well in terms of, because you'd have to have the kid talking in the class whilst
of course.
So there's logistical elements of that, and also ICT provision in schools.
Yeah.
So for us with kids with dyspraxia as well, sentence starters that are already typed up and closed passages are really good for checking what they've known, and it just takes that sort of that burden off the motor skills and also energy. That's been my experience of it in terms of working with one particular pupil. So
this is like an extension of you as an English teacher as well, isn't it? Because English teachers do all these things regularly in class. I mean, I'm an English teacher as well, so it sounds very familiar, but it's been very specific about it, isn't it? In these classrooms that you're teaching in, it's kind of having the foresight and thinking ahead and knowing the students and being adaptable on the spot to be able to implement these sentence starters, these adaptive technologies or whatever to support them. How about, because we had a couple of comments on X, I don't know if you remember, but I don't know if it was about dyslexia or what, but the next topic is dyslexia. And it can create challenges in reading and writing, can't it? With particularly like spelling and organization of ideas and stuff. So how does dyslexia impact writing then in your kind of experience, and what can we do to support teachers?
So I think that there were dyslexia is obviously it's a complex it's the process of phonological awareness and information, how pupils process that and break sounds into words, and how they pair vowel sounds, how they pick up word patterns, and we mentioned in the poster there the idea of decoding and encoding when writing, decoding when reading. And as a result, with dyslexia, you can struggle with writing because you're having to decode
Yeah.
the question and then encode when you're writing. So it's hugely demanding. And we did mention the confusion of B and D. Those words were in there,
Yeah.
or those
Yeah.
letters. Now, that isn't every child. It'll be, it may or may not be. It was a common pattern that was established early on, but it's now become kind of, it's much more nuanced than that, which
That was the comment we had, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Someone said it's, that's
Yeah.
not in every child or something. Is that what they
No.
said?
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
point that I was making was that these are like common things that you might hear or see, but we don't have enough room to include all of that
No, of
content.
course not.
But there are common things that you will see. And so, from my point of view, I've always found when I've been working with dyslexic pupils that it's not, again, it's not intelligence related, and it's
Mm.
important. I think that's kind of one of the aspects that parents and teachers maybe are kind of, there's a conversation to be had there. I don't know
Mm.
if schools explain that process to parents,
Yeah.
because some parents are like, can have a negative view of it, and they don't want anybody to know their child's dyslexic. But
Mm.
children who have dyslexia are in some of the research that I've read, it certainly talked about the high creativity levels, alternative thinking. They have another way of looking at systems and approaches. So it's exploiting maybe those aspects of their thinking.
Yeah.
But again, it's difficult in a big setting. So in terms of the strategies, it's again it's phonological breaking down of words into different sound groups. It's looking at prefixes and suffixes, starts and ends of words, pattern recognition, and also there's a program you can use called cued spelling, where you take pupils through high frequency words, the top 100, and then you can lean into the other words built off that. So there's lots of different ways of approaching dyslexia. But what I would say is that, and I agree with some of the comments, that it's not intelligence based. It's a barrier uh, to reading and writing because it's encoding and decoding. So there's a lot there. It's partly, I'm still learning about it as well, because I have two pupils
Mm.
with dyslexia that I'm working with, and I'm reading some research around that at the minute too. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. It's looking at visuals, letters, trying to break things down into small chunks, and building that reading confidence and speaking confidence as well.
Yeah, brilliant. And then the fourth one we touch upon in our poster is the autism spectrum disorder, so ASD, which obviously is quite personal to me because my son is ASD.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be interesting to hear from what you have to say about, in terms of what your experience is in working with ASD students and what kind of scaffolding strategies you use to help develop their written expression. Because obviously I alluded to earlier that my son does struggle with writing and forming his letters and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One thing he does do is they give him a lot of brain breaks as well. Sometimes he can't always, sustain his attention because he's got ADHD as well. So he needs quite frequent breaks, and then coming back to writing because he finds it so tough. So what is it essentially, and what kind of strategies can we put in place to help these students?
So it's kind of from a writing perspective, it's the difficulty of perspective taking, and coming from an abstract point of view. And that's what I've experienced with some of the pupils I've worked with. And it's trying to create these lead-ins to abstract thinking, or taking different perspectives. And often that can be done through characters, through comparatives are really good because they're really concrete. You can use comparatives. I'm using those at the minute with one pupil to show the difference in vocabulary, but it's using characters to show that explicitly. So it's trying to explicitly deal with vocabulary, and then trying to marry that together, as in, why is this character like this, and why is this character like that? So there's that's one in for it. So a lot of the time it's based on this idea of trying to make that leap into something that we find quite natural in terms of abstract thinking, and it's this idea of surety. So, like I was reading a bit of research about persuasive writing and in ASD, and this piece of research talked about that ASD persuasive essays were slightly shorter and less tactically complex than those essays produced by neurotypical pupils. However, they found that ASD pupils used a greater frequency of unique and rare words. And their suggestions were across the essay. They used advanced vocabulary and showed some inaccuracies with grammar, but there was complexity in the vocabulary. So it's and I've seen that with the pupil I'm working with who has a brilliant understanding of vocabulary and the complexity of it, and when to use it. But it's the basic things of trying to get them to take information out of a text, quote that information, and then tell me how that links to his analysis. Whereas he's already jumping to the analysis because he's kind of like he's got all that in the chamber to talk about it, and I'm trying to teach him that you have to kind of justify your answer with the evidence. So I'm working the other way, and it's quite an interesting way to work. But again, it's the research that was done previously on this by Ollinghouse, Graham, and Gillespie in 2015. They were given a writing prompt where the pupil could choose the topic. Previous research, they didn't allow the pupil to choose the topic. And they found that the research where the pupil was allowed to choose the topic of something that was interesting to them, they had to write, they were able to write more. When they had to write about the previous topic, and the first piece of research was write an interesting essay about outer space. So again, it's quite an open, but this one they were allowed to choose the topic. And imagine you've been asked to write a report about a topic, about an object, place, or activity. That's your favorite place, object, or activity, and you have to include information in that. And they found that there was a higher end vocabulary in there. They wrote less, but it was more specialized vocabulary. So that was really interesting. And the final point about that was they talked about children with ASD didn't differ in their lexical diversity or frequency of long words. And they had a greater frequency of rare words. So you can see there the other side of ASD, and this is what I'm becoming more aware of too. That the pupil I teach is highly selective in his vocabulary. It's often very formal, and it's very intellectual in tone, even when he speaks. So you get this kind of like that enriches the class, because they're wondering where's he getting all these words from, and you can then well, let's take that word and let's talk about it. So pupils who speak in that formal language can often be a springboard for those other pupils in the class too, and it creates that inclusivity. So that's a characteristic of some children on the spectrum, is the use of the intellectual, highly formal language, and very controlled. And that's been my experience as well. So yeah, it's just about exploiting those little aspects of their own writing and their speech.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Mike. We're just going to quickly have a mini break, because we're going to quickly go to hear from our sponsors, because we have, remember, John Catt and Reading Solutions UK. And I just want to show you this quick video. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK, home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Welcome back. Remember, this is a live show, everybody, so please type in your questions if you want to. Having a really enlightening discussion with Martin on special educational needs and disability students and writing today. So please feel free to type in your questions. We've only got a bit of time left. I want to skip ahead with Martin now and want to head to the topic of supporting SEND students very briefly before we move on to some whole school approaches as well. So we'll start with just talking, Martin, if you don't mind, just skipping down the list a little bit of what we
Sure.
were discussing beforehand,
Mhm.
and just talking, about, I guess, feedback, and what are some feedback strategies, that teachers can use to help students with special educational needs and disabilities, to kind of help them in their writing. Is that something you do with these students quite often? And because I can imagine it might overwhelm them.
Yeah. I think, like I said, it's about breaking things down into smaller pieces, and depending on the pupil as well, it needs to be really specific,
Yeah.
and there needs to be specific examples then to reinforce that, like you would with any other pupil. Um, the difference might be that the volume of writing that you have to feedback on might be smaller. So
Yeah.
time is important too, that you give time for that. And we talk about this idea of lingering for longer, and that's certainly one aspect that I would do with pupils from a SEND group. So I would probably take longer and maybe go through something 3 or 4 times with them. Um, and focusing on 1 or 2 areas for improvement for a good piece of time, maybe 3 4 lessons, and then recap, and then coming back to it.
Yeah.
Rewriting something as well is really, really good with them, and then doing something as a group as well. Writing as a group is always interesting to, trying to
Okay.
model an example. And then the self-assessment is, again, it's not just the sort of old idea of self-assessment is, here's the mark scheme, here's a couple of points, go through it. The nature of self-assessment in the SEND, for me anyway, in my classroom, is about picking out first. What I would tend to do is pick an easy win. So it would be something like fixing their letters and their punctuation, like full stops, capital letters. And when they fix that, that's an easy win, because it's like, right, that's great, we've got that. And then the next one might be something like choosing synonyms for their vocabulary. How can we extend our vocabulary? And then we would look at maybe changing the sentence structure and adding in more sort of complex vocabulary. So it's kind of, for me, it's sentence and word level stuff.
Right.
Would be more. Whereas when you're working with a GCSE class of 30, you're going to go for the big picture stuff, and
Yeah.
you'll try and hit as many of those as you can. But with SEND pupils and time, you've got that time to look at sentence level, sentence
Yeah.
structure, and word level. Almost kind of an analysis of what they've written.
And not
Um,
rushing it.
no, it's given the time, and a huge part of it is trust. A lot of these pupils have been a wee bit burned by the mainstream system, in my experience, and it's
Yeah.
just trying to get that reluctant learner to become kind of involved in their own learning. So there's a lot of that pastoral side of it. So effective feedback strategies would involve small steps, but again, with the view that you're aiming to get them to where where they should be and everybody else is. It just will take a wee bit longer. So on your end of things, you have to be patient. And
Yeah,
that's
because you mentioned like that obviously mainstream students work at a faster pace. You can
Mhm,
see the big picture more. I guess
mhm,
if that's what you said before. But
yeah.
how can we balance that need for being like an adaptive teacher, but also ensure that SEND students are working towards those same aspirational goals,
Mhm.
as their peers, as kind of mainstream students? How do we keep that, the same aspirational goals for them?
In terms of setting out expectations and high expectations for all in your class, I mean that's a school cultural thing, I think, as well, as
Mm,
much as it is in your own classroom. And
yeah,
I think trying to give them an understanding, like I said at the start, about progress over perfection, and it's creating a culture where editing, self-editing, and fixing is okay, and you're not going to get it first time.
yeah,
And I think when you're trying to get everybody to the top of the mountain, as Tom Sherrington talks about, it's some will need a wee bit of help along the way. My issue with mainstream is that um, it's the time aspect and the numbers. So
mm,
it's you have to be really selective about what you're going to do with them and what's going to be the biggest, the easy win first, and then the big gains. So it's trying to find, and that'll be different in different classes for different pupils, but certainly having high expectations for the basics,
yeah,
in terms of like punctuation and accurate spelling of high frequency words, and then building on that, maybe choosing one or two things from the success criteria or from your mark scheme,
yeah,
and kind of, and for me, it's letting them know that you don't have to move with everybody.
mm,
You'll get there, and it's creating that safety of it's just going to take a wee bit more time. Um, and the analogy that I had used was, when we talk about PE, children have no issue with, when they know that they're a faster runner, like they're quicker than me. But when it
yeah,
comes to, they don't apply the same analogy, or analytical thinking in the classroom. And it's like, right, if I put you all out on a line and asked you to run a lap, um, and you're all going to get different times. Yeah, that's because we run different speeds and we're different shapes and we're different. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, right. So let's take that and like place it in the room. Right, okay. But how, it's quite funny to watch because they're kind of trying to make the leap. And I'm kind of like, right, the analogy is that we're all still going to go to the finish line, but we're going to go at different speeds.
yeah,
And that's kind of, where you go. The only problem I've had with that analogy is, some pupils, again, here, who aren't very abstract, are like, well, who wins? And it's like, right, everybody wins. It's
Every-
like, so yeah, it's that idea, yeah.
Well, this ties in nicely with what the next topic is, which is pretty much, the whole school approaches, because you mentioned about building a culture, and lots of my conversations on this show are about building a school culture.
Hmm.
And I'll come to the question in a second, because I'm going to talk about what you mentioned in your research ed presentation about building a picture of need. So we'll
Hmm.
come to that in a second, Martin. But
Hmm.
we just did have a question on the screen, which is, I'm enjoying listening to Martin's wise words. I think most students need things breaking down into manageable chunks. I do as well. So I think it helps all students and teachers probably as well. And
Yeah.
they are wise words. And that's why I do like your book so much, Martin, because, from an English teacher's perspective and not just SEND,
Hmm.
the kind of basing concepts on Rosenshine's principles and the solid principles of good teaching and learning and evidence-based teaching and learning
Hmm.
works regardless of whether you're working with mainstream students, but also has a powerful effect on students with special educational needs and disabilities as well. So let's
Yeah.
jump to that question I was going to ask you about dead quick, which was
Hmm.
building a picture of need. And you mentioned that it's really important for schools to develop an aerial view,
Hmm.
and build a picture of need. So
Hmm.
how can schools develop a coherent, whole school approach for literacy and intervention for SEND students?
So, in terms of, in my experience, what had worked well was looking at, uh, the the intake. So let's start from you call it's year 7 in England, year 8
Yeah.
in Northern Ireland. So they come in first year, and you have your baselining. And a lot of the time, the baselining is done within subjects. So you'll have your own assessments and things like that, which is perfectly normal and healthy in a school system. Everybody does their own assessments, and we use those to kind of baseline. But the issue with that is how is it standardized and measurable across the whole cohort? So we do things like GL assessment, we use PTEs, PTMs, and we use maybe a introductory assessment in the class. What I found is more useful is to look at the reading age data. Um, the reading age data is a harder number in terms of impact, I found, because I was just talking to a colleague yesterday, and I put up on screen the different PT scores. So 69 is the lowest, 78, 82, 101, 120, 130. And it's okay, you can see the difference numerically, but those pupils may or may not present, the kids at the top end of that standardized score will probably have similar traits, but it's the ones in the middle and at the bottom that number becomes almost arbitrary. It doesn't, you get some sort of a profile, it's good for grouping. But if I show that to a teacher, we found in my previous school that number didn't hit as hard as the reading age, because if
Right.
I put the reading age up, the difference there is you can see a chronological age, where they are, and the difference, and that is a
Yeah.
much harder number in terms of what we know as teachers. We can, if somebody has a reading age of 9 and 3 months and they're in first year, that they're, so immediately you have that group. So
Yeah.
there's your intervention right there. That's your group. It's those
Right.
pupils who are below the chronological reading age. And then when you dig deeper, you can do your dyslexia screening, or your dyscalculia screening, or your other SEND testing, and it's much more focused. What I found in mainstream was you were getting to assessment 2, which was post Christmas. The kids already sat for 4 months. By the
Yeah.
time you get them and you figure out that there's something wrong, or PT and PTMs don't really do that, neither do assessments within. It just tells you that they don't know the content. But beneath that, they might have a reading age of 7 or 8. So
Right.
that then leads to kids not coming into school. They misbehave. They want out of the room. And if you're going through 5 hours a day for say the first 8 weeks of school, 5 hours a day, 5 times a week, and you're not coping with 10 or 15 different subjects, why would you come in this? Why would you come into school?
Yeah.
It's it's just,
Yeah.
so I did see that happen, and when we got the reading ages, then our interventions were much more focused, and they were measurable
Right.
then, because we could put in place our paired reading, cued spelling, and all those other strategies. The
Yeah.
other thing, the other thing that it does is you have a list of pupils then that you can disseminate to staff across departments, and then they're going to come
Yeah.
back and say, how do we deal with this? And then you say, right, well, in English we use, this is the scaffolding approach,
Yeah.
and you're more likely to get staff on board that way, because it's a much more concrete number, and you can also arrange your seating that way. You could measure it over the course of the 3 years at the school. You can do your value added as well. So in terms of that, it creates that consistency, and it's evidence based, and it's objective. Um, and you know, for me, I would prefer to have the reading age. As we talked about, how reading age is a good way to triage pupils coming in, and
Right.
it was David Dito I listened to actually talking about that with GL, and it was a really interesting perspective, because Alex Quigley actually did a study a while back with 340,000 children in Blackpool. It's called Read All About It. And
Oh
he
yeah.
looked at the correlation between subjects and reading age and outcomes at GCSE. And the top obviously was English language. The second was geography, and the third was maths. So geography is it kind of puts geography back on the map. That's a terrible, terrible pun. But geography is that kind of that fusion between writing and numbers.
Did you
or
plan that one, Martin?
graphs. I actually have it written down here, sadly, yeah.
It's a good one.
No, I've been waiting. I've had that one in the chamber, Jamie, for a while. So yeah, so geography. So in my previous school, I went to the head of geography and was like, look, this is the research, and they were just blown away. They were like, right, okay, can we do a scaffold for a migrant? So they'll read about a migrant moving from Mexico to the US. What are the arguments for and against? Okay, statistically, let's look at the maps, let's look at the graphs, let's look at statistics, and it's a really nice fusion between maths and English. So my advice would be to get geography, maths, and English together and see if
Yeah.
there's any fusion there. So that's how you could do it on a departmental level. Um, and then your classroom level is your scaffolds and your key vocabulary, breaking things down into chunks. So the reading aids will tell you what pupils need that and what pupils don't. And also on the other end of that, if you've got the really, really advanced readers in the class, I'm always cautious using the top end pupil, because obviously you've still got those in the race that are trying to get to the end. But you could use them even as a tool in the class to support others, to support the points on the board, and as a model of excellence as well, so you can take out bits and pieces. So it works both ways, and you can get that sort of middle group. What the ability level is in the middle group too. So I just think that reading age is just a harder number, and traditionally it's just to go across subjects. I think that if you have progress test for English, progress test for maths, it lends itself to the culture that numeracy is for maths and literacy is for English.
Yeah,
but
of course,
reading aids, they all have to read in everybody's class. So it's a nice way to kind of dissolve that that sort of border around English and maths, that only those departments look after them. And it's a good way of sharing the responsibility of the importance, because like we said about the Matthew effect, the word rich get richer, the word poor get poorer, and the point of them being in school is to enhance their reading skills and to help them engage with the society that they're in, and democratic processes. AI, for example, is another one. I mean, how can they engage with AI? And because what you put into AI, you get back out. But if you can't formulate, think, and understand concepts, even then there's a digital divide, despite having the device and access to it.
Absolutely, and I really want to ask you about that actually, but we've run out of time a little bit in terms of AI and assistive technology. I know you mentioned it earlier a little bit in terms of what you do with, the voice to text and things like that. But there's a whole deeper discussion there, isn't there, about how this can, send students in the classroom. I love your ideas on, whole school approaches and, the reading age data and stuff, because I saw on your tweets and what people have been sharing that there was a lot of conversation around, some of the slides you had about data-driven support and, kind of tailoring it around that. So that's really enlightening what you've just been saying there. So thanks for that. But I just do want to flip to the end, because we're coming towards the end of the show now.
Sure.
And that is just the future directions in SEND support, and like what emerging trends or research in SEND are kind of emerging, and what are you most excited about, and what should like teachers know about?
I think for me, I think with the technology that we have, and the systems that we have those pupils in, I'll just start with the negative, not the negative, but the context. The education system has been inflexible in terms of, if it were a business, it would be gone, right? It doesn't move with its customer. I don't like calling pupils customers, but if we were to use that analogy, it's very inflexible. And hopefully, I have seen, certainly on my end, in Northern Ireland, the conversation around SEND is becoming much broader, and there's greater awareness. For SEND support, I think the biggest thing is teacher training and CPD, but it can't just be like,
Bolted
this is
on.
what. It needs to be ingrained into teacher training in particular. A separate module, or a high focus, or a case study, something that requires that deep dive into the for example, the writing process and SEND. Reading and writing and SEND would be a perfect way to look at that. because it's something that every subject needs to do. So I think with that, the digital tools that we have are becoming much more advanced. That's a good thing. We need to look as well at social emotional learning as well, like how
Yeah.
pupils feel about their learning, how we can get their voice back into everything again. And I think that's becoming more prevalent as well. And I suppose the professional development and staying informed, being part of collaborative groups like yourself and Teacher Talk. And the CPD, I think, has been outsourced into, because it was so bad. We've kind of outsourced it ourselves. We've created it ourselves for, teachers are dictating their CPD outside of the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And, I've had 10 differentiation days over my 15 years of teaching.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of thinking the cost of having everybody in the one room for 1 hour is huge. So it's about looking at the latest research and small group settings. And one other aspect I would say in terms of the future of SEND is creating space within schools, even the architecture and design of schools. It
Mm.
has to change. It's having
Mm.
this a separate or an area of the school that caters for pupils like the ones I'm working with. It
Yeah.
allows for small groups and teachers to work one to one. Not a space to send classes for cover, but a
Yeah.
send space, and not a unit, a space where pupils can come in and out of it as and when
Yeah.
required. So it's that fluidity in the school, and I think I've seen that in my previous school. That certainly does work, and it's very well planned, and it does work when you've got the right staff. Um,
That's really wise words, Martin. I think you're
mm,
talking real common sense there.
mm,
And it's interesting you're saying about teachers kind of running their own PD on it now. And this is why things like Research Ed are so important. And what
yeah,
you're delivering at Research Ed, for example, has been well received. And now we've
mhm,
had this opportunity to talk about it here,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's such a powerful thing. And we've got like over 500 people watching now, for example, who are going to
brilliant.
take a lot from this conversation.
Yeah,
So thanks for that. And I just want to quickly, before you go, I want to ask you one thing to wrap up.
mhm,
Um, what's one of the key takeaways that teachers should take away from this conversation today that we've talked about? Because I know I was really enjoying what you just said there. So I'm
mhm.
sorry if it kind of sound like I cut you off a little bit,
No,
but
it's
I want to
okay.
jump to the takeaway and
Mhm.
what's one thing you'd hope people would take from it?
I think so I can split it into pastoral and curriculum for me,
Yeah.
right? Because the two go hand in hand, but also that's not always apparent. For me, pastorally, getting to know the pupil and thinking about their emotional involvement with their learning and how um, barriers can eat away and can undermine confidence, and they can get lost in the system. So it's
Yeah.
just creating that awareness that this is what's going on in this kid's head. These are all the things they're trying to do. And we just need to have a greater understanding and awareness. And I think from my perspective, certainly two things. One was is being adaptable, is the adaptability. And number two is knowing when you've got something wrong and you have to kind of look at breaking your own teaching and starting
Yeah.
again and not being afraid to do that. Um,
Yeah.
and patience is a key aspect of that. So pastorally, it's knowing the child and having the patience and the time and setting aside time for you to read about these things. And because you will only benefit, it'll enrich your teaching.
Mm.
Curriculum wise, um, I would say that middle leaders have a huge part to play in
Mm.
terms of how they set the agenda. And it's not always possible in every school, but if middle leaders can get their sort, like I talked about geography being the linchpin between maths and
Yeah.
English, that's a powerful alliance. So it's creating those alliances in school, looking at one or a group of pupils and their work across different subjects, getting together, looking at common trends, and doing the small basic things well. And that's kind of where I'm coming from is that collaborative approach. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think middle leaders have a huge say in this, and they are the engine room of any school. And I think that needs to be reestablished. And you can
Yeah.
do that through this avenue of reading ages and scaffolds because they're very tangible things. They're not just a number floating around a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So try and build alliances and take ownership of your professional development. as early as you can, because it's not always. I understand schools are complex systems and there's things that need to be done, and like anything, you have to invest a bit in yourself, and I would encourage everybody to do that.
But I suppose that's why we developed the poster as well, isn't it? To help busy teachers kind of engage with it on a practical level and be aware of it. I love the idea of having that shared understanding across a school as well, and having that collaboration to have, these strategies in place and this awareness in place. So really powerful stuff, Martin. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you.
And, as we've got some comments, I can see them now, like, thank you so much for a fascinating discussion. Martin's words, really wise, was said earlier, and I totally agree with that. You've been so enlightening in what you've been saying, so thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And please check out Martin's work online on X and LinkedIn as well. Martin shares frequently, and I'm sure we'll do another collaboration at some point. But we've got a good reception on Send and writing, so maybe we'll do another one and make it easily digestible for teachers to engage with this content in future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Okay, everybody. So that was Martin Ferguson talking about special educational needs and disabilities and writing, which I just said, really fascinating stuff, really kind of wise words from Martin there, and some great ideas and awareness about Send. So please visit the show again and come back in 2 weeks and see what we've got on offer. If you missed this show today, it will be a recording and a podcast. You'll be able to catch it on the playlist, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show. And we'll be back in 2 weeks' time for another Saturday show live. So thank you, and I will see you next time.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.